Hello and welcome. I'm Jake, and this is Mysterious Planet, where we delve into some of the world's greatest mysteries, including the supernatural, scientific and archaeological anomalies, as well as various conspiracies. Thank you so much for listening to our very first episode, which is titled, Who Took Johnny Gosch? Johnny Gosch was a 12-year-old paperboy in West Des Moines, Iowa, who seemed to disappear into thin air on the morning of September 5th, 1982. Thought to have been kidnapped, Johnny Gosch hasn't been seen since that fateful morning, and is most famous for being the second missing child to be featured on the back of a milk carton. As you'll see on this episode of the show, the case of Johnny Gosch has since become the subject of much debate, as well as conspiracy theories, much in part due to the strange approach taken to this case by law enforcement. I'm confident that many of you will be shocked by what you are about to hear, as I was. Thanks again for joining us on Mysterious Planet. On Sunday, September 5th, 1982, in a suburb in West Des Moines, Iowa, Johnny Gosch left for his morning paper route before dawn. Usually, Johnny's father would accompany him on his paper route, but this morning, Johnny wanted to get an early start so that he and his family could leave early for what should have been a fun-filled day at the lake. So that morning, Johnny left accompanied only by the family dog Gretchen. Other paper carriers for the Des Moines Register reported seeing Johnny at the paper drop, picking up his newspapers. This is the last sighting of Johnny that can be confirmed by multiple witnesses. A neighbor named Mike reported that he observed Johnny speaking to a stocky man driving a blue two-toned Ford Fairmont. The car had a Nebraska license plate. The neighbor was unable to hear what the two were discussing, due to the fact that he was watching from his bedroom window. As Johnny headed home, the neighbor reported seeing another man following Johnny. Later on, another neighbor reported being woken up by the slamming of a car door. When the neighbor looked out the window, they witnessed the Ford Fairmont car speeding off, blowing through a stop sign and taking a left turn. Early that morning, John and Noreen Gosch, Johnny's parents, began receiving phone calls. The phone calls were from customers who hadn't received their newspapers. Johnny's father soon set out at about 6 a.m. to look for him. 2 blocks from their home, Johnny's father found his son's unattended wagon full of newspapers. The dog was still there. The Gosch family immediately contacted the West Des Moines Police Department to report Johnny's disappearance. In Noreen Gosch's book, titled Why Johnny Can't Come Home, it is stated that it took the police a full 45 minutes to show up to the Gosch home to take the report. In addition to this, back then the policy was that a person couldn't be classified as missing until 72 hours had passed. Think about that, 72 hours. This meant that no investigation could begin until the 72-hour mark. Several days after the kidnapping, thousands of citizens in the town began helping with the search for Johnny Gosch. Psychics even started calling the Gosch household, telling them that Johnny was dead and that his body could be found down by a creek in the woods. The search parties looked down at the creek, wanting to check before the snow came, but no body was found. After a while, the citizen-led search parties stopped looking, and everyone went back to their lives. Everyone, that is, except for Johnny's parents. They furiously stuck to the case, attacking it and following every single lead they could. The same could not be said, however, for law enforcement. And that's really where this story gets fishy. That's really where this story gets suspicious. The inaction of law enforcement when it came to this case. When it came to the case of Johnny Gosch is so astounding. The inaction of law enforcement, in this case, is unbelievable. The police basically refused to get the help of the FBI, repeatedly telling Noreen Gosch, hey, look, we're sorry, but we don't have a crime to investigate. Well, Noreen didn't have a son to put to bed at night. Apparently, in the 1980s, the FBI was happy to track your stolen car across state lines, but when it came to a missing child, they suddenly grew tired of being so helpful. Orval Cooney, the police chief of the West Des Moines Police Department, was equally unhelpful, stating in an interview, quote, "I don't give a damn what Noreen Gosch has to say. I'm getting kind of sick of her," unquote. The Gosches were repeatedly told by government agencies that they needed proof that Johnny was endangered, that until Johnny Gosch was proven to be in danger, he was considered a runaway. Not really sure how they were supposed to prove that Johnny was in danger when they didn't even know where he was. It was later proven that Orval Cooney, the police chief, was not handling the case correctly. In addition to this, it was proven that Cooney was handling other cases with racial prejudice, as well as holding up an investigation of his own son. Orval Cooney soon stepped down when, quote, administrative deficiencies were proven. John and Noreen Gosch caught somewhat of a break in the case when they met a man by the name of Ken Wooden, who is an expert on pedophiles. It became painfully obvious to Ken Wooden that Johnny Gosch was indeed kidnapped. One of the main reasons he found this to be obvious was the fact that Johnny's dog was left behind. It was obvious he wasn't a runaway. It was obvious he was taken. At this point in time, most people didn't even know what the word pedophile meant, which was a big problem. And the case of Johnny Gosch and individuals involved with it, such as Ken Wooden, were instrumental in raising awareness about the intentions of pedophilic individuals in the U.S. Fast forward to August 14th, 1984. Almost exactly 2 years after Johnny Gosch was taken, yet another paperboy from Des Moines was kidnapped. Eugene Martin, 13 years old, kidnapped while delivering newspapers. Witnesses reported seeing him talking to a man in a car. When John and Noreen Gosch heard about this, they immediately gained contact with Eugene Martin's parents. John Gosch described the situation as being like watching a movie again, but with different actors. Everyone involved was in shock. The same thing was happening all over again. In September of 1984, a local dairy came up with the idea of putting Johnny and Eugene's pictures on the side of their milk cartons, trying to help raise awareness about the cases. Over the next few years, clues to Johnny's whereabouts began popping up. In 1985, a woman in a grocery store received change, and on one of the dollar bills was a handwritten note that said, quote, "I am alive," signed Johnny Gosch. Personally, I'm not sure what to make of this clue. On one hand, it's easy to think that this could have been a hoax. But on the other hand, perhaps Johnny's parents likely wouldn't have taken it quite as seriously if they didn't think it was their son's handwriting. And they did take it seriously. But in 1991, things really started to get interesting. This is when a 24-year-old prison inmate by the name of Paul Benassi came forward, claiming that he had helped abduct Johnny Gosch. Paul Benassi claimed that he was in a car with the head of a child sex trafficking ring when they pulled up to Johnny Gosch. He said that when they pulled up to Johnny, Benassi was the one to get out of the car and put a cloth soaked in chloroform over Johnny's face, dragging Johnny into the car. Benassi himself was actually a victim of a child prostitution ring in Omaha, Nebraska. He claims that he was actually forced by his captors into helping abduct Johnny. He was in prison in 1991 as a convicted sex offender and was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder. It was through one of his multiple personalities that he was able to recount his part in the kidnapping of Johnny Gosch. It took a little while, but eventually Noreen Gosch worked up the courage to go and sit down with Paul Bonacci to ask him questions. During their sit-down, Bonacci stated that the boss's name was Emilio, and that they chose Johnny in part because Johnny was close with his family, stating that Emilio liked hurting people. Bonacci even provided forensic specialists with details for a composite sketch of Emilio. According to Paul's account, after Johnny was kidnapped, Paul Bonacci was the first one to molest Johnny on film. These pictures and pieces of footage were used to advertise Johnny, either for sale or for services to another pedophile. And hearing that is absolutely sickening. What Paul Bonacci told Johnny's mother next, though, is pretty shocking as well. Bonacci recalled Johnny telling him about how he and Noreen Gosch used to attend yoga classes together. Noreen was shocked to hear this, as she had never, not once, told the press that she used to take Johnny to her yoga classes. She taught yoga and still does to this day, I believe. Bonacci was able to identify other things about Johnny. A scar on his tongue from when Johnny bit his tongue at a young age, a burn scar on his lower leg, and a stammer in Johnny's speech when he got upset. Given all of these things that Paul Bonacci knew, one would think that law enforcement would have been dying to talk to him. However, they never did. Why? And this right here is really what gives this case its whole conspiracy tone. The fact that law enforcement wouldn't even talk to Paul Bonacci after all those years of dead ends and frustration. Police did take a trip down to Omaha, Nebraska, where they spoke with Bonacci's siblings. According to Bonacci's siblings, Paul Bonacci was in Omaha at the time of Johnny's kidnapping. But Bonacci said otherwise. And keep in mind, Bonacci was getting no benefit from his account. No reduced sentence, no deals, nothing like that. So what the hell was going on? And why did it seem like there was such a massive cover-up by law enforcement? When interviewed about Paul Bonacci, Police Lieutenant Lyle McKinney stated that they may or may not interview Bonacci when the time is right. Maybe some of you are still unconvinced of Bonacci's authenticity. We'll take this next bit into account. During an interview with the TV show America's Most Wanted, Bonacci reported seeing Johnny Gosch again in 1986, during a trip to Colorado, where Johnny was being kept by a man called the Colonel. He stated that Johnny had tried to escape his captors, and upon being recaptured, was branded. Bonacci drew a sketch of the brand mark that was on Johnny. When this story was released, America's Most Wanted began receiving dozens of calls from kids who came forward saying that they were victims of the same ring. One of the kids had the exact same brand mark that Bonacci had described. Paul Bonacci then told America's Most Wanted about the house that Johnny and other kids were kept at in Colorado. According to Bonacci, the house was out in the countryside of Colorado and contained an underground chamber where the kids were kept. When America's Most Wanted took a trip with Bonacci out to Colorado, there the house was. Sure enough, Bonacci walked over to a trap door near the side of the house. He opened it up, and there was the underground chamber. Kids' initials were carved into the wood inside the chamber. Despite all of this, however, Bonacci and the team of America's Most Wanted had nothing that could be proven in a court of law in regards to Johnny Gosch. no individuals to go after. The entire team of America's Most Wanted, with all of their resources, had nothing. Many crime experts have used Benassi's claims to highlight a child sex trafficking ring in Omaha. According to many experts, often high-ranking and or wealthy individuals in Omaha would be customers of this trafficking ring, and they would pay large sums of money to abuse so-called clean kids or virgins. This is perhaps one of the most gruesome aspects of this entire story. So, perhaps the most chilling and mysterious aspect of this case is the massive cover-up that seems to be going on. One would be pretty hard-pressed to convince me that there isn't one going on here. What seems to be happening is that many higher-up individuals, wealthy individuals taking part in these human trafficking rings, were controlling those in government using their vast amount of wealth, resources, and power. The Discovery Channel, for instance, was originally supposed to do a documentary back in the 90s about these child sex trafficking rings. But Discovery Channel executives soon ceased all efforts toward the documentary. People were sent to interview the executives, asking why. The executives turned away the interviewers, not wanting to speak on it, not wanting anything to do with the situation. In addition to this, victims of these sex trafficking rings were treated terribly by the FBI. Instead of being treated like victims, which they were treated like criminals. They were treated as guilty. Many attorneys of the victims even told the victims not to come forward and try to make a case with physical evidence, as they would most definitely be found guilty of forgery. These higher-ups that were involved with sex trafficking rings had control over the media, they had control over the judicial system, and they had control over the police department. And that is truly terrifying. That is corruption. This isn't some tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. This is true and horrifying. In fact, to this day, FBI officials will most likely refuse to answer any questions regarding Johnny Gosch, as highlighted in the documentary called Who Took Johnny? And you guys really should go check this out. Go see it for yourself in the documentary. The documentary is called, once again, Who Took Johnny? And in the documentary, you can actually see for yourself. There's a scene where a cameraman is sent to D.C. to interview a member of the FBI's child abduction unit. The guy's standing there in front of the camera. He's nervous, he's sweating, he looks totally uneasy. And the cameraman asks the guy if he's familiar with the Johnny Gosch case. And the guy's a part of the FBI's child abduction unit, says, quote, "I am not personally familiar with that case," unquote. Think about that. We are honestly supposed to believe that a member of the FBI's child abduction unit doesn't know about one of the most infamous kidnapping cases ever. Give me a break. And some lady in the room who also works for the FBI says to the cameraman, to the interviewer, she says, quote, "We agreed we weren't going to ask questions about Johnny or talk about it at all." If not some sort of mass conspiracy, there is obviously at least some sort of cover-up going on for the purpose of the FBI being able to protect their organization's reputation. In 2006, more evidence popped up. Noreen Gosch received tons of pictures on her computer of young boys tied up and gagged. 4 of the pictures, she is absolutely sure, are of her son. The West Des Moines Police Department were able to identify 3 of the boys, but were not able to identify the ones that Noreen Gosch believes to be of Johnny. Noreen claims that the police department is mistaken and that the photos are indeed of her son. What I'm about to cover next, however, is likely the kicker of the story. It is likely the most haunting aspect of this story. In the late 90s, Johnny Gosch was asked to be present at a court hearing. The trial was taking place due to Benassi's lawsuit against an alleged perpetrator. During the hearing, Johnny Gosch was asked a series of questions. Her answer to one of these questions shocked everyone. When asked if she had seen Johnny since his disappearance in 1982, Johnny Gosch answered, once. She claims that in 1997, two men showed up at her front door. When she asked who it was, one of the men said, "Mom, it's me." It was Johnny, now an adult, accompanied by another man. The two stayed with Noreen for about an hour. Johnny told his mother about the sex trafficking organization, about how they would ship and sell kids around the country. Johnny explained that the people who ran the organization would control the kids with fear, brainwashing them, telling them that if they sought out help, they would be punished for the things they had been forced into doing. Noreen says that Johnny would often glance at the man that was with him for permission to speak. Johnny left out a lot of the raw details in his description of the organization, likely to spare his mother some of the horror, or possibly because he felt embarrassed. After about an hour, Johnny and the man had to leave. Johnny told his mother that she couldn't tell anyone about his visit, or it would put him in danger. Noreen kept that night to herself for 2 years, before eventually speaking out about it during the court hearing. To this day, Johnny is still considered a missing person. His case is perhaps one of the most mysterious disappearance cases of all time. He practically disappeared into thin air, and according to Johnny Gosch, he disappeared into thin air twice. We may never know exactly what happened to Johnny Gosch. If you'd like to know more about the case of Johnny Gosch, I would recommend checking out the documentary called Who Took Johnny? Very well made and informative documentary. I would also recommend picking up a copy of Johnny Gosch's book titled Why Johnny Can't Come Home. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Mysterious Planet. I'm Jake, your host. I greatly appreciate you joining us on our very first episode, and I would greatly appreciate you spreading the word about this show if you're so inclined. In the meantime, I plan to prove that our commitment to providing all of you with new content is very strong. Some of the upcoming topics that I plan to discuss here on Mysterious Planet include the mystery of civilization. Is advanced civilization older than we think? Exorcisms and the paranormal, the existence of sea monsters, what caused the extinction of the Ice Age megamammals, Illuminati, was there civilization on Mars, the Mandela effect, Nazi and World War II conspiracies, and much, much more. We plan to have interesting guests on to talk about these issues and possibly expand into hosting debates in the future as well. I hope to see you all back again. Stay tuned for more content.